Welcome back to this episode of the Geeky Clinicians Podcast. And we have the honor and privilege today of having George Braucht on as our esteemed guest on the podcast. So we have an opportunity to learn from him and learn a lot about the field of addiction and his work with CARES and his origin story as how he became a geeky clinician. And so we are so excited to have him. But before that, as always, I am Dr. Deborah Dantzler, Chief Geek here at Geeky Clinicians, and I'll let the team introduce themselves.
I'm Jacinta. I'm lead clinician and lead geek at 3D Psychotherapy.
Hi, I'm Sandra, and I am the Postmaster's resident participant, one of them here at 3D Psychotherapy. Hi.
Thank you. And so today, as I said, I'm going to read this whole thing. George S. Braucht, LPC, CPCS, and CARES. Right. So Mr. Braucht has over 14,000 hours of supervised psychotherapy and community psychology experience, including a consulting specialization in workforce development and continuous quality and outcome improvement. George enjoys facilitating behavioral health and social justice trainings with professional and peer service providers. He co-founded the Certified Addiction Recovery Empowerment Specialist Academy, a peer recovery coach curriculum that is operational in several states, and the Forensic Peer Mentor Ready for Reentry Pro training for peer service providers who have lived experience in the criminal legal system. Before retiring from the state of Georgia, George created the Transitional Housing for Offender Reentry Directory and the Reentry Partnership Housing Initiative, both of which are online recovery residents and other housing resources. He assisted in opening the first 2 residential substance abuse treatment programs in prisons and the first 5-day reporting centers. He also directed a statewide recovery counseling program for people on parole, and he implemented an intensive enhanced supervision program training for parole, probation, and correctional officers so needed. More recently, he assisted in developing and delivering curricula for recovery residence manager certification. Okay. And REC CAP navigator trainings. George is a charter board member and a curriculum developer with the National Alliance for Recovery Residences. He is a level 2 PCOMS trainer and Better Outcomes Now, and he serves as a national recovery consultant with the SAMHSA Opioid Response Network. George is also a person in long-term recovery. Welcome, George.
Thank you very much.
We're so happy to have you.
I'm just delighted to be here with y'all.
Yes. And as I was telling my team, as we just were starting, that George and I go way back. Way back. We served on the board of the Georgia Association of Recovery Residents way so many years ago. And I remember when when NARS started and you were a part of that, and like you've done so much great work over your career, and I'm just so excited. Let me ask this question. Origin story. We usually start with origin story. So we usually go all the way back.
Okay. Well, I mean,
how did you begin your journey to becoming a geeky clinician?
I specifically remember I took a psychology class in high school. And I mean, it was probably the only class I ever took in high school that I really was interested in the subject. I had a really good teacher. And that kind of led me to pursue the path of getting academic degrees in psychology. And it just was a matter of figuring out sort of what my passion was in terms of facilitating conversations with people about what they were experiencing in life and challenges and how they thought they would get through those. And so it just was, I don't know. And part of it had to do with the fact that my parents were very much community oriented. We were members of the First United Methodist Church in Warner Robins, and anytime the doors were open, we were there, kind of thing. And at one point, it's kind of hard to believe, but at one point, I even had a key to the church, which, yeah, that's a strange thing. But anyway, so that's kind of in my cultural makeup, I guess I would say.
Okay, so the service oriented, basically from birth. You got it naturally. You got it like from your parents, like they were very service oriented, and
Yeah.
so this orientation towards service, and then this general curiosity around how people have their lived experiences and how they navigate challenges and things like that.
Perfect.
But what's the orientation to the field of addiction, right?
Well,
It is one that is obviously very close to my heart because that's where I started out from day one. But I want to hear your journey to this specific field because this isn't for everyone. We do hard work.
no doubt. and it's, I mean, it really, I was let me think, 10 years, 8 years into doing work in the behavioral health field before I made the decision. And actually some people came to me and said, you're pretty good at what you do, but we think you could be better. And that led me to make the decision to stop using alcohol and all illicit drugs. And well, part of the reason for that too was one of my best friends, who happened to also be the folks I most often got drugs from, got busted and went to jail. And so I kind of I just kind of let that go. But it really is about with my experience in community mental health. And I had a 5-year job working at the Hodak Community Crisis Center in Warner Robins. It stood out to me that there were people who were disenfranchised because our culture said you weren't worth the time and the energy that's necessary to help you move through the challenges that are presented by our culture in terms of having jobs that you make a living wage at and a place to live that was clean and healthy and safe. And so that is kind of what moved me into, well, first I went into teaching psychology, but I moved back to Georgia after about 6 years of doing that, mainly because I had a sabbatical. It was during the winter, and my family and I moved back to Warner Robins. And frankly, I'd forgotten how mild the winters were here. And that was all it took. So within the next year, I made the decision to come back. And that's when I started working. Well, I taught for a while at Athens Tech, but then I got a job as a counselor with the State Board of Pardons and Paroles in the Athens Parole Office. And I just thought I knew about people who had been disenfranchised. It was at that point that I realized the depth at which this problem really does exist. And one of the most startling events that happened during my career with the parole board happened the first week that I was employed there.
Really?
They called me. One of the officers called me into his office and said, we've got a guy that we're going to arrest because he's testing positive. And so I went into his office, and it was on the second floor of the building, and they had him up against the wall and were frisking him. And I was trying to talk to him about what was going on. And next thing we know, he flipped open the lock on the window and flipped the window up, and before anything else we could do, dove out the window. And literally the parole officer and I each had a hold of one of his legs. And the real startling point of this, besides that, was that his sister was attending a school that was next door to the building. and she happened to be outside smoking a cigarette, and she saw him hanging out the window. And it was at that point that she was able to kind of say, please don't hurt yourself. I love you. And we want to make sure you're okay. And just really a lot of positive things. And he kept saying, it just doesn't matter. Nobody really cares.
Mm.
And so that kind of grounded me in the dire need for us to do something that really does better than simply tell people you're the problem. And it's about us being aware of how what really is relevant here is that behavior is always a function of the interaction between people and their environments. And we've got a medicalization of the process that says, no, the problem is all inside of you. And when I was in college, I was taught, those people, they're different from the rest of us because they got this genetic problem that we don't have. Well, I'm not disagreeing that there's a genetic component to it, but somebody had to teach me how to use drugs, and somebody had to teach me how to get over the effects of the drugs, and somebody had to reward my drug use in order for me to continue doing it. And so all of that really was the driving force to me really staying integrated into trying to help make this system a little more culturally competent and focusing specifically at some point on peer services as one of the essential tools that's necessary.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a really powerful story, and so early on in your career as well. Usually one of the things we like to ask our guests are, what have been some of the biggest challenges you've experienced, and what have been some of the biggest wins that you've experienced as across your career?
Well, I would say, well, I'll start with the challenges. It's just the sense of, am I effective? Am I doing this work in a way that is producing the sort of results that improves the quality of life, not just for the people that I'm providing services to, but for the rest of the community as well. And again, that's kind of a shift of focus. It's broader than just talking about whether or not people who come to counseling actually get into and sustain their progressive wellness. It's about, are we addressing the social determinants of health? And are we doing things that really bring people into a sense of belonging within communities that have value to each person? And to me, that's probably the biggest challenge of all, because one of the things that tends to happen when people start using alcohol and other drugs, and others who have behavioral health challenges, is that they withdraw. They become more isolated, and part of that has to do with the stigma and discrimination that they're facing. And so it really is about making a community where people have that sense of, I'm valued, I'm worthwhile, I belong here, and I'm safe. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do today.
No, but it's so essential. I always say that our two human drivers, the things that kind of make us get up and operate in the world, are connection and purpose.
Absolutely.
And your whole, the large part of your career with NAR, with GAR, with CARES, which I can't wait to hear the origin story around that. But with all of that, it really is taking people who may have been at the depth of their lowestness, like they thought like they couldn't do, had no worth, they could do no more, like their family had discarded them, society had discarded them. Like you said, there was this isolation, and it really is pouring back into them and saying, we're connected to you. You have purpose and you have value. and really, oh my God. I don't even know what, when I was the executive director of Covenant Community Residential Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center for Homeless Men, we had two of our guys go through one of the early cares academy, and just to see like how transformative that was for them to have that experience, to have that pride, like they have their certificate, like so yeah. Okay.
And I mean, you just named one of my biggest accomplishments. And you did perfect. It really is just incredible to watch how the difference between people on that Monday morning when they walk in the door and they say, yeah, I'm a person in recovery. And then when they leave on Friday afternoon, there is this transformation in how they think about this big R recovery thing. And I've seen people who thought they were just the biggest empaths on earth begin to realize that, I'm still kind of stuck in my ego, and I need to figure out a better way of being with others. And part of what I teach is in CARES Academy, but in others, is using the pink ORCs. And pink is something that I actually got from intentional peer support. And it stands for practice intentionally not knowing. And the ORCs it's OARSI. So practice intentionally not knowing, or curiosity, with open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, summaries, and last on purpose is information giving. And until the other person has that sense of, you get me, you understand me and my worldview, we tend to get into debates as opposed to dialogues with folks. And so that to me, seeing that transformation happen, and then being able to point to the good work that all of those folks are doing. I mean, we have a version of the CARES Academy in Minnesota and in South Carolina, and it's just one of those miracles, I would say, where folks who are in recovery are really learning how to move to the next level in terms of their recovery, and promoting this development of communities of support for one another.
Absolutely. Jacinta, did you have something? Sandra?
It sounded like you gave keys for curiosity. Can you repeat those?
So it's pink, practice intentionally not knowing. And a lot of people would call this motivational interviewing skills, but I was teaching this way before MI came along. But it's OARSI, open-ended questions, affirmations or validations, reflections or paraphrases. S is summaries, and I is information giving. And it's last on purpose. And we do some exercises towards the end of the academy where we'll put up on the screen, this is what you're going to hear when you get back to where you came from. And it's stuff like, that all that CARES Academy stuff that may be good, but it ain't gonna work here. We asked the class, so how do you respond to that? And it's incredible how many people start off by basically saying, and let me tell you why. And I have to kind of prompt them to say, well, let's back up now. Remember pink ORCs. Because the challenge is if you don't take the time to really understand that other person's values and the culture that they're coming from, telling them they're wrong. I mean, how many times have you ever said, no, you're wrong? And the other person goes, oh, yeah, you're right. I need to change my whole life because you said so.
Zero.
In that way. So that's at the heart of it, I would say. Yeah. But the second piece that is my perhaps biggest accomplishment is part of the reason I started the CARES Academy was because I wanted to be able to go back into carceral systems and have an impact there. And so that the CARES Academy was kind of the first step towards developing what today is referred to as the Forensic Peer Mentor Ready for Reentry Pro training. And so, in addition to having lived experience in behavioral health or substance use, these are people who have lived experience in carceral systems. Either they've been convicted and sentenced to jail or prison. And it's about them being able to help people who are returning citizens. And we don't use the O word. That's the system calls them that, but we don't. But it's about how do you go about reestablishing yourself as, again, a valued member of the community, who makes retributions for the whatever challenges you may have caused with the crimes that were committed. And then you restore yourself and the safety and the health of the community. And it's through that work that fundamentally, I mean, as the CARES Academy is uber cool, but the forensic peer mentors are the ones that I think are producing some of the most significant, challenging changes in the carceral system in this state. We've got a long way to go. I don't want to act like we're anywhere close to actually doing something that has moved Georgia off the top of the list of not just the state that incarcerates more of its citizens, but we're in the country that incarcerates more of its citizens than any other country on the planet. And so I'm hopeful that at some point all of that will begin to be addressed. But it's helping folks return and become citizens all again that I think is at the heart of what I'm most excited about.
Absolutely. When did that program start?
Well, CARE started in 2010 or 11, and then the Forensic Peer Mentor Training, we got a SAMHSA grant when I was contracted with the Georgia Health Consumer Network, and we got a SAMHSA grant in 2018, I think it was, and we did the first training in 2019.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. And I think it, like, going back to what you're saying, like these returning citizens, that pouring into them and letting them know that they have value, but it's also people like us, other geeky clinicians, being able to see their value. Absolutely. To be able to pour into them, right? I always was early on oriented and have teach, if you're working with clients, if you cannot take the position of there for the grace of God go I, then you don't need to be in this field. You do not need to be working in the field of addiction, because if any other orientation, you're not going to see that person for the full humanity and value that they have. And you have to start there, because if we don't see it, they're not going to see it for themselves.
Yep. You can't even go into treatment judgment free if you think that you're above the problem that they're dealing with.
Well, and it's so interesting because we have a culture, a society that tells some people, you're not going to make it without us helping you. And once you've been to jail or prison, you've got a stigma on you that is almost impossible to get rid of. Yeah. And it's not just the big systems, it's the little systems that we live in that manifest this idea that you need somebody to solve your problems because you can't.
So what unique challenges would you say are part of dealing with recovery in communities of color, marginalized groups?
Well, in marginalized groups, there's the almost inherent sense of you are less than, you are not privileged, and you can never be privileged. And just accept it and go on and worship the old white men, because they're the ones that will actually control your fate.
Wow.
And but part of it also has to do, and there's layers of this, of course, but even within the marginalized groups, there's differences in how men and women are characterized and what roles they are expected to play. Women are supposed to be emotional and
Mhm.
soft, and
Mhm.
don't speak up, and certainly don't act like you have an opinion unless you're invited.
Right.
Men are supposed to be the strong ones who will always stand up and think clearly and
Mhm.
take charge as a function of just being male.
Yeah.
And what we know is that that's
That's
just
not always true.
no. I mean, it's complete bull.
Yeah.
It's yin and yang. We've got both of those elements within us, and
Mhm.
it's the degree to which
Mhm.
our educational systems, and I'm not just talking about schools, but I'm talking about how our parents treated us and how our relatives treated us, and then how our school system treated us, but all of that puts us into specific boxes, if you will, or roles. And part of the real challenge in being disenfranchised is having a support system that really helps you break through
Yeah.
whatever that barrier or that set of barriers are, and will continue to support you when you don't act in a manner that's consistent with the stereotype.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. George, I want to ask you a question that so you just mentioned, you talked about the challenges of this within the system and systems, because there's layers to this thing. But if we look at the kind of this overarching system, and of course within the carceral system and just in America in general, like this kind of there's something that is we know to be true is the white body supremacy. And the idea that this is the thing that is acceptable and anything else is kind of unacceptable, and you just need to accept that and kind of thing. Now, you being in this system and clearly not ascribing to that belief, how do you navigate? How do you serve as, I don't know, a bridge, or how do you handle that, right? Like, how do you communicate with your peers that are in the system to say that's not okay?
Well, and it's so interesting because when I was doing clinical supervision, there was always the challenge of working with counselors who thought it was their job to tell people how to fix their problems.
Mhm.
And the parallel to that in the peer world is that it's always a challenge for people who are in recovery. And I use that word carefully because a lot of folks don't use it because of the stigma. But they come in with the similar view that it's my job to tell you that my way of recovery is the best one. If you really want to do it my way.
Mhm.
And it's the same dynamic. It's saying, I've got the wisdom that you don't have, and what
Mhm.
you need to do is do what I tell you to do.
Yeah.
And it's that same sort of one step down, seeing people as less than, that I think really gets in the way of being able to understand their worldview and their perspective.
Yeah.
But
Sandra?
it's incredible when people begin to realize the the challenge and the difficulty of actually being able to understand another person's worldview.
Yes. And I guess that's really what I'm asking in terms of, and maybe I'm wrong, because as a bridge, well, maybe I'm seeing this, but you working and dedicating to working with persons in recovery, that have been in the carceral system, a lot of which are maybe from marginalized communities, and then being connected to the larger system. How do you translate, or how do you navigate these different worldviews to help kind of either eliminate barriers or to open access, um, you know, in that framework?
Well, it's fundamentally, sometimes it just means learning how to sit in the suck,
Mm,
you know, and I do a fair amount of cultural humility or competence training. And that's kind of the first lesson is I've got to be able to take care of myself. And it may not be the case that what's best in any given situation is for me to challenge the person who's got higher status or more power. Now, I will do that, and it has cost me in some instances. But it's about kind of figuring out, what do I need to take care of myself right now? If I say something that offends you, you have the right to say ouch. And that's one of the things that I really think is an important element of effective relationships. And the point of saying ouch is to say, you said something that offended me, but I don't necessarily think you said it to intentionally offend me. You just may not know better. You have an implicit bias that may not really be something that you're even aware of. And saying ouch is a way of pausing the conversation. And if the person is willing, then talking about that. What does that mean? Why did you say that? How did you come to know that? To again, get their sense of how they make sense of the world. But then it's beyond that, being able to address the challenges that exist in the systems. And that's where it really does become challenging. Even though I started the day reporting centers, or I was part of the group that started the day reporting centers, as well as what's now called RSAT programs, the people who work in those Department of Corrections and Department of Community Supervision, even the parole board, there's still this sort of element of, we're doing the best we can and we can't do anything more. And I'm not disagreeing with that. But what we're seeing with the forensic peer mentors, for example, is that there's a huge need, but, well, frankly, nobody's willing to pay them a living wage to do the job.
mm,
And that's kind of that's one of the biggest challenges. And I'm thrilled that the enhanced supervision program, the curriculum that we put together, I don't know, 15 years ago, is still being implemented with the Department of Community Supervision. And in fact, as part of that program, the officers will wear body cameras when they go out and have their interactions with the supervisees. And then they come back and they and their supervisors review the footage and see whether or not they're using the enhanced supervision program principles and practices, a foundation of which is motivational interviewing. So it's I don't know that there's any magic wand that could be waved that would suddenly fix the system, but it's making those small progresses that matter. And for me, the fundamental, the individual marker of improvement is, has the returning citizen got to the point of receiving a pardon and a complete restoration of rights?
mm,
Because in the crime desistance world, the community owes a retributive debt at some point to end punishment. Period. End of that sentence. And so it's really taken what's called the social model of recovery and expanding it just a little bit, so that we're really focusing on, what do we do in order to help people feel like they're valued and that they're making a significant contribution that improves the health and the safety of the community. And fundamentally, that's what it's all about.
absolutely. Sandra, you were going to say something?
Oh my God, I'm in hog heaven right now. This is my world and I love it. So thank you, Mr. George, so much. I have so many questions, but I'm not going to inundate you with all of them, but I would throw two out. When we have someone re-entering into our communities, how is there a program where they're working with their families
Mhm.
to heal that bridge before they are released, and also aftercare once they are released? And how do you work with the families to understand that, okay, their time, they have done it, they've healed that, and they want to come back and start afresh? Where at what point are you working with them, and where are you in that work?
I'm so glad you asked that, because part of what the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities has done, and they're the ones that they're essentially funding the forensic peer mentor positions. They have started what they call the free program. I'm not going to be able to remember what it stands for, but basically it's a family reunification process that begins while the individual is in prison. And the forensic peer mentor, and well, so it's a curriculum that is delivered by the forensic peer mentor to the folks who are in prison. And then there's someone a counselor at the community service board, who is delivering the same curriculum to the family members of that returning citizen. And then at some point, they all come together, and it is about reunifying. Because, one of the biggest challenges when people get sent off to prison is that they often have multiple arrests and multiple jails,
Yeah.
and they are viewed by their family as almost incapable of fulfilling a parental role or a spouse role. And it's having genuine discussions and sincere discussions about how do you move back into that space that's at the heart of what the free program is about.
Yeah.
And if anybody's interested in learning more about it, I suggest that you contact Logie Ruffin, who is the forensic peer mentor training, and I'm not sure what the rest of his title is.
What's his
at
first name?
DBHDD. Logie, Ladji Ruffin, Ruffin.
And we can put any resources that you feel are appropriate in the show notes.
Excellent.
So after this, if there's anything, you just email me, and then when we put together the show, all those resources and connections and resources can be in the show notes for people, and they can just access them that way as well.
Good.
I had actually written that question down, Sandra, so I'm glad you asked. Great minds, right?
I
There
know,
you go.
right? Oh my God,
Yeah.
I love it. And Mr. George, the other piece was I actually did your strength profile online
Oh,
last
nice.
night. And so I love doing assessments. I love I love them. I'm addicted to them.
Me too.
So my number one, my top three were honesty, spirituality, and love of learning. And so I really connected with those. Is this an assessment that you offer with the those that are reentering and with the families, so they can understand each person's characteristic and what they value the most?
Yes, and well, so part of the emphasis that I make is that it's really relevant, the quality and the quantity of members in your network. So again, it's kind of the opposite of addiction is connection. And it's really about the fact that we tend to isolate, we tend to not have pro-social partners, particularly folks in the justice system or the carceral system. And so it's how do you make those connections is a big part of this. And at the heart of it, I mean, and I'm one of my fascinations actually is community psychology and then positive psychology. And that's where the strengths focus comes in. I have to make diagnoses and tell people what's wrong with them in order to get paid. But I find that is almost useful in my clinical work. Having a diagnosis really doesn't do anything for me other than being able to communicate to others what my sense is of what this person walked in the door with. But more important than that is, what are your strengths? And I appreciate you doing the quiz and finding out what your strengths are, because fundamentally, often what we emphasize to people is, you're depressed, you got stinking thinking, you need to change your lifestyle, without really focusing on, so what are your strengths? What are your values? And then at the next level up, what are the strengths of the people who you are closest to, and what are their values, and how much overlap is there between you and them? And then we can even take it up another level. And in this team, what are your strengths for each individual? And are they complementary, or are there aspects of what you're really good at that others on the team not so much? And it's a way of, again, helping to expand the focus, so that we're really looking at the quality of what we are delivering and providing to the networks or the communities that we're a part of. And so with the families, yes, it's a wonderful tool to take back and say, here's the things that I'm good at. Mama, here's your things. Daddy, here's your things. Sister and brother, here are your things. And what do you think our next step would be in improving the quality of this environment that we're all contributing to? And again, you could do this at the next level with organizations. And the strength focus, to me, it was a huge shift in my way of thinking about what I really needed to hone in on as I made that transition from kind of traditional medical clinical services to what is now referred to as the social model.
Thank you. One more question. What would be your wisdom in providing to treatment providers as they are approaching burnout when it comes to working with this population? Because when we get to that burnout part, we forget about that these are human beings, that they make mistakes just like anybody else. And it's one thing to hold them accountable, but it's another when we judge them and destroy them.
Yeah. Well, it really kind of boils down to your valuing your own self. And by that, I mean, do you really have a accurate self-assessment? And I'm really talking about from a cultural perspective. Do you know what your culture consists of? Do you participate in the rituals and the ceremonies that are part of what help you feel like you're part of the community? What are you doing personally to make sure you are having, and you might want to write this down, fun?
Fun, yes.
Fun, because even the word functional, you can't spell it without fun.
That's right.
And that's the piece that often gets left out. It's all about self-care and yada, yada, yada. But ultimately, how much fun are you having as a person in recovery? If I ain't having fun, I ain't in recovery. That's just the bottom line. Yeah. And so it is about play, and it is about doing things that allow me to have glimmers of awe and glimmers of joy, and intentionally have experiences that create that sense of wow, and being intentional about doing that on a consistent and regular basis, I think, is a big part of it. And then the other thing is, I think it's really important to have the ability, again, to sit in the suck and to say, I think I did as well as I could, and it really sucks that this person got rearrested or attempted suicide or went back to jail or went to the hospital or whatever. And to not take that to the point at which you go home and you kick the dog, for example. and so it's kind of a strange system that we have to build around ourselves so that we prioritize our health and well-being, because those days are going to happen. And one of the things I encourage folks to do is to create a treasure chest. Mine started off as a little a file card box. You remember the old metal ones? Yeah, y'all aren't old enough for that. But and whenever I'd get a note or a letter or an email from somebody saying thank you for what you did, yada yada yada, I'll take and put that in my treasure chest. And when I have those days where I just think, why am I doing this? It's not working. I'm not being effective. I'll go get that treasure chest and pull it out and just kind of read through some of the things that are validating about the work and the service that I'm trying to do. And that tends to kind of lift my spirits back up to a level of being human, as opposed to thinking I should be a god and I never make mistakes.
Oh.
And that's my tip.
George, thank you so much. That was you don't even know how much I needed to have that reminder about you can't have functional without fun. And really, there's taking care of ourselves. This year has been very challenging, just even holding space for our clients that we serve. And burnout has definitely been knocking at the door, trying to, capture, because it's just been a very heightened emotional experiences.
Yeah.
And to really remember that we are our instrument and we have to take care of ourselves, that if we are not healthy and well, if we do not prioritize ourselves, we are of no service. We are of no good to the people we're here to serve. So thank you so much. I definitely needed to have that reminder today.
You're very wise, Deborah.
There is one question that we always ask our guests as we end, before we end. And that question is, what are your best hopes for our profession, for the future of geeky clinicians? What are your best hopes for the profession?
In a word, collaboration. And it's about recognizing that we are an important part of a multi-level system that includes other professional and peer service providers. And to get out of the binomial thinking of either or, and to embrace the notion of both and as what's really going to take us to the next level. So yes, we need doctors and nurses and the medical profession. And we need social workers and counselors. And we need peer recovery support service providers, as well as community organizations. And it's the full network that we should see ourselves as a part of. And ideally, at some point, our profession will embrace that idea, such that, I don't know about you, but the training process, the focus is really, I think, should be, and to some extent is, but not quite as much as I'd like, focused on professional development. And so the fundamental question is, what are you working on getting better at doing? And having a thought through plan. It's always been striking to me. People come in for counseling and we develop a treatment plan. Well, if you're a service provider, what is your treatment plan? I shouldn't use the word treatment, but what is your professional development plan? And ideally, our profession will get to the point of where we're kind of getting there with certification and licensing and those sorts of things. But at the more practical level, who are you serving? How much do you know about those subcultures that those people are a part of? And how much are you integrating yourself into those subsystems? And that's a real challenge, because you don't get that when you go to graduate school.
Oh, one more question. I promise. Because he hit it when he said graduate school. For those of us, Mr. George, who are, I do a lot of evidence-based substance use treatment, and coming out of school, learning the educational component, the purpose of it, the purpose of delivering it the way that it has been written. What would you give? What advice or wisdom would you give to someone who is excited about being in the field, has a great passion for it, as they're working with this population?
Spend as much time and energy as you put into learning evidence-based practices to develop practice-based evidence of effectiveness.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And a shameless plug, that's where the Partners for Change Outcome Management System, or PCOMS, comes into play. I mean, it's two simple surveys that take 5 minutes, one at the beginning of an interaction, the other at the end of the interaction. And it's a way of getting to the evidence-based practice that has been determined to be most essential in producing positive outcomes. And that is the service recipient's view of the helping relationship. Not whether I think what we're doing is working, but do you think it's working? And so Dr. Barry Duncan's has developed these tools, and it's available. They're free. You can download them from betteroutcomesnow.com. But it's I've been teaching this stuff, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And it's a challenge, because what we're often so busy doing is going from client to client to client, and forcing ourselves to stop and to actually look at the numbers. Are the people that I'm providing services to, are they seeing themselves get better? It's not my opinion that matters. And the other side of that is, a lot of times folks will tell you, oh yeah, I'm getting so much better. And then they'll tell you about all the challenges that they've just faced in the last week. Yeah. So you've got to be able to kind of lean into, here's what the numbers say, but here's what your dialogue is telling me. How do we make these things coincide with each other? And that's what the PCOMS tools will allow people to really nail down, qualitatively and quantitatively, whether or not you're seeing evidence-based, you're using an evidence-based practice to collect practice-based evidence of effectiveness.
Excellent. So, George, do you have a training on PCOMS coming up? Do you do trainings on PCOMS through your organization? Or would you like to do a training on PCOMS for Geeky Clinicians Academy?
I'd be delighted.
Yay.
And it can be, typically what I like to do is it's a 6-hour training, but it's ideally divided into 2 sessions.
Okay.
And the first one, you kind of learn about the tools and you learn how to download them and all that sort of stuff. You use them, and then you come back to the second session. We talk about how you really geek out by looking at the data.
Yes.
I'm so glad I could use that term here and everybody understands what I mean.
George, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and we covered so many great things. Thank you so much for taking your time and being with us here on Geeky Clinicians Podcast. And so for those people watching, as always, please like, subscribe, share this episode, and we will see you guys next time on Geeky Clinicians Podcast.
Thank you. Y'all be well.